Well, for more on India's elections, let's bring in Sourabh Gupta. Sourabh is a senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist from the Institute for China-American Studies. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So this has been a rather contentious election, especially in the closing periods. Where do things currently stand, not just with the election predictions, but how the voting process has played out?
It's played out as was anticipated. Indian elections tended to have a lot of violence associated with it, electoral violence. Now that they stagger it over a month and a half, a lot of that violence has come down, which is a good thing so that they can maintain good control. It's gone smoothly. The Indian electorate the originality about the Indian electorate is that they're poor, but they keep coming out in even greater numbers to cast their votes, which is a good thing for democracy.
And we certainly saw also a lot more women participating in this year's elections. And it is a lengthy process, and Indian voters are required to participate. Are there any sort of common themes that you're seeing voters rallying behind in this election?
Oh, yes, I do see, because there is distress in the country. India is growing well, but the main problem, and this has been a problem for quite some time, it's not been employment-intensive growth. The structure of the Indian economy is either very agrarian or it's capital-intensive. It's not labor-intensive, and that has hurt employment. And there is great amount of unemployment when huge number of bodies are getting into the job market, because India's electorate is young. The demographics are there's a huge number of young people under 25. And so those issues are common to all, but the irony here is that because Mr. Modi has not been able to deliver the good days which he had promised in 2014, he has kind of pivoted to a more muscular nationalistic theme in his campaign, which has actually been the dominant theme of the campaign, which is a little bit at variance with what voters want, frankly.
And let's talk about some of Prime Minister Modi's promises. A lot of people say that he's struggled to fulfill his promise to create tens of millions of jobs and also to double the salaries of a key voting bloc. Farmers and agriculture actually employs about 50% of India's population. How costly do you think that might be?
It could come back to haunt him, and haunt him in a big way, but I will say that the BJP is very aware of it. And I say this because the last BJP government prior to Mr. Modi, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee in the early 2000s, the government was doing very well, the economy was doing well, and they had this campaign called Shining India campaign. But that was also a time of global ag distress in terms of low prices for crops, which also translated in India to a lot of agricultural distress, and there was a complete upset in that election. And I think the BJP is very aware of it, and that's why in the last year or so, they've been kind of just funneling and throwing money at the problem, which doesn't solve it, but from an electoral perspective might be able to help them cut their losses out there.
And while India's economy is seeing enviable growth, obviously if you put it in the context of how other countries are doing, growth did slow in the last few months of 2018. We saw vehicle sales slump and also some other signs of a slowdown. How much of that, though, is about so-called Modinomics versus other pressures?
I think it's more cyclical. Modinomics really kicked in an unfortunate way with the demonetization during the mid part of his term, and that had an effect. But right now, in the latter stages of 2018 and early 2019, there has been a little bit of a cyclical downturn, not just in India, but in many emerging markets. And India has suffered from that. So I would ascribe it to that. But again, the hope that Mr. Modi came in 2014 and genuine hope, because he had done so well in his state of Gujarat, where he was the chief minister, has not really translated at the central level. And that's the disappointment of how this term has played itself out.
So then do you see him potentially shifting gears? And if so, what are India's economic priorities right now?
Let me give a little credit to Mr. Modi. During his term, one of the things he did do, which he paid a great degree of emphasis on, is to improve the business environment. He was very fixated on the doing business metrics of the World Bank. He read that thoroughly. He said, on each of the metrics, I want improvement, and he has delivered improvement. So there has been improved macroeconomic policy. There's no question compared to the Congress party, because The BJP has not done well in office under Mr. Modi, but voters remember the Congress party, how long it's been in power and the failed promises, and that is what has sustained Mr. Modi even in this election, despite not being able to achieve what he has. But in the economic front, we've talked about rural distress, we talked about unemployment. India really needs to integrate in a qualitatively deeper way with the world in terms of having labor-intensive exports, integrate into the Asian free trade areas, have regional connectivity, cross-border, sub-regional connectivity. These are things he talked about in 2014, did not deliver, but I think the moment has come, is now.
And we know that another centerpiece for Modi is his Made in India push. But then you also have this relationship with the US and China, who are embroiled in a trade dispute. How do you see India sort of balancing its allegiances?
India has tried to find a little advantage in the course of the US-China trade differences and see if it could expand its markets in China, especially because there is a significant bilateral trade deficit that it faces with China. And that was part of the reason for Make in India also, like, hey, come to India and make, and the problem has been he wants to do this behind high tariff walls, keep tariff walls high so people can't export to India. They will come to India and they will produce in India and export out, which is a little bit of a Trumpian strategy. And just as Trumpian economics does not work, even that has not worked, because what he needs to do is reduce tariff levels, ease labor and employment laws, and hope to become a powerful, dynamic, labor-intensive export economy to develop country markets. But that process just hasn't worked, unfortunately.
All right, always good to have you on. Thank you so much.